Hello and welcome to another episode of the World Class Real Estate Podcast, sponsored by Iceberg Digital. I'm Mark Orland. I'm joined today by Mr. Ian Macbeth. As always, I feel like maybe we don't need to say that anymore. What do you think?
I'm happy for the Mr. to be removed.
Yeah.
Well, you just call me Ian.
Did I call you Mr. Ian Macbeth?
Mr. Yeah, like a client. Like an offer sheet.
Very, very formal.
Yeah, I'm happy to just be Ian. My friends sometimes call me Macca. If we're in the running circle, they call me the mountain goat. It's entirely up to you. But we're going to talk about education, training, coaching, things like that today.
Yeah, so I mentioned as we were talking about today's episode that I've got a careers fair at my son's school this week, and I seem to remember that you've done something similar in terms of education and going into some schools and just educating them on mortgages and house buying process a little bit, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So we thought it'd make a decent podcast episode, and there's probably quite a lot in terms of, if we make it a little bit more generic in terms of education, that we can talk about. So am I right in thinking that you have done careers fairs and that sort of thing at schools, and what sort of thing did you talk about?
Yeah, I kind of called the schools out a little bit to say, especially at the sixth form and college level, you know, when you kind of get 16, 17, 18, I kind of just felt that they get people to come in and, you know, they might get a vet to come in and share their story about being a vet, or some, you know, one of the pupils' dads is a pilot, so he comes in to talk about being a pilot. Bullshit that people don't need to know. But I said, why don't you get us to come in and talk about credit rating, mortgages, how buying a property works, the difference of buying versus renting, and get people at that age bracket to really understand why and how you can own a property. So since we kind of kicked Avocado off, Mike's been into a couple of schools and done some educational stuff. I've got a real...
So you didn't let him out the office?
Well, it was a private school. He was happy to go to that one. He knew he'd get good questions in the private school, so he was okay with it. I do the public schools. But yeah, there's one that I go back to every single year.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of others that we've done ad hoc careers days and stuff like that. But I think what I always find really, really interesting is, and one of them, I've got a whole form of sixth form. So there's like 200 people saying this like massive room. But one thing that I always found interesting is how little they know about this side of things. And actually the teachers as well, funnily enough, that some of the questions that they ask me afterwards, teachers obviously teachers' salaries, a lot of them are younger, they're renting, and they were surprised by some of the stuff that I was educating the pupils on as well, which it then shows how important our industry is to educate the public in this aspect of things.
Yeah, and I think if you think of coming out of school at whatever age, whether it's 16, 18, 20, 21, you've probably not had a conversation about a mortgage, about the process of buying a house, and then you're going to go into work, and at some stage you're going to want to buy a house. Hopefully, you know, we would say hopefully sooner rather than later. It might be many years, but actually if you've got that knowledge up front, you can start talking about credit ratings, you can start talking about the importance of saving and putting money away, and actually that can make a big difference. You can make a difference if you got that advice as soon as you started earning versus just blowing all of that money. That could make a 5-year difference in home ownership. That's another rung on the property ladder. It's massive.
Yeah, I think that subject that we're talking about here, in trying to just give back a little bit as agents, we do a lot of we don't do a lot of take. We give a lot of service away for free. Yeah, you know, because not everyone moves, so we give a lot away in terms of service, but actually knowledge. When you go, we're going to a barbecue later on today. It is a barbecue full of estate agents. This question won't be asked. You know, well, what's going? Probably will be. What's the market like?
Yeah, it definitely will be asked. Yeah.
But if you go to a normal barbecue, not full of estate agents, and they find out you are an agent, it's pretty much 99% of the time the first question they ask.
Yes.
And people want to know, but people need to understand it as well. And if you've got a friend or, you know, someone's son or daughter that's looking to buy a property, speak to Ian and talk to him. He'll help you out, give you a full 60-minute education on buying your first house.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But it is something that people don't get. You know, they don't understand interest rates, what the base rate does. They don't understand the difference of loan to values with mortgages. People don't understand how messing up your credit rating, this is a key one for me with the younger generation, messing up your credit rating, what an impact impacts that can have negatively, and also how to build a credit rating.
Yeah.
You know, the importance of having a little bit of credit and paying it off consistently versus just being, you know,
clean
money under the mattress saver. Well, you have no credit profile. You can't ever borrow a decent amount of money because they don't know whether you can do it and pay it back. So it's that fine limit of understanding credit rating. And then the people that do, you know, get the mobile phone, or they go on Klarna these days and get the latest pair of Jordans, you know, 3 months worth of installments, don't pay the third, and then they can't buy a property for 10 years because they didn't, you know, pay for their trainers. It's crazy what could happen if you get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are important warnings for people to hear at any stage of life. But, you know, we're talking specifically here about, so I think primary school might be a little bit lost on them, what I'm doing this week. But I think in general, and that is education that we can give out, whether it's a careers fair, but actually, if we think about it, it's probably those sorts of videos that we could put out and use as education just generally, because you're quite right. You don't need to do anything to plan it. It's all up here. You can just talk about it.
Yeah. I think even at primary school, kids at that age can understand you can either buy a house and own a house, or you can rent a house and pay someone else for a house. Like this, there's levels of just understanding at a basic kind of, you know, numbers game, what goes on. And, you know, even my daughter, she's 8 years old, and we often walk to school and we talk about what marketing is the topic that we were having last year. Just getting her to understand what marketing is. And she now understands what marketing is. She knows the types of things that you can do to generate business effectively. And it's those little things are great. What about like personal training and education? Where do you stand on that? I mean, tomorrow at a mastermind, so you're obviously a believer in it. But how much do you think you've done over the last sort of 5-10 years that's really benefited you?
Once a week, every week for the last 5 years, doing this podcast.
Outside of the pod and the mastermind.
Well, it's really interesting, and it probably started for me quite a lot of listening to podcasts. I was thinking this morning, actually, and I packed my running stuff thinking I might go for a run tomorrow morning, because I've stopped running, then I'm not listening to anywhere near as many podcasts, and that was where I got a lot of my personal development, got quite into the high performance podcast, listened to quite a lot of other agency podcasts and stuff in America, stuff in Australia, and did a lot on that. And then since I've stopped running, my levels of personal development have probably dropped a little bit, but I do have an hour in a week in my default diary, as you would call it, that is set aside for personal development, where I'll watch some videos. There's a couple of training courses that I'm enrolled in. A couple of weeks ago, I did some training with Stephen Brown, that we got Lee Woodward on to do some specific buyer training. I got all the team on that. So I don't think I'm doing as much as I once did, but I am also doing a lot regular. And, you know, this podcast, you know, I always take something that we talk about and learn, and maybe I don't implement it 100% of the time, but I've always got ideas for stuff. So I like to think that I'm quite into personal development. I'm always really encouraging the team to do personal development. We have a learning session once a month where the team bring back podcasts they've listened to or book they've read, some form of, you know, non-work related, just personal development. It might be that it relates back to work in some way, but I'm always really encouraging the team to try and do more. So I don't know, you'd probably say I'm quite into it. I think it's really important. I think if we're not growing and moving forward, we're moving backwards and dying. And I just think that in Stephen's saying, every day is a learning day is one of my favourites, because I think it's so important. And what about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I try and use the analogy of it's a little bit like your money. If your money's sat in the bank account, inflation is happening, you're losing money on it. And if you do nothing with your education, the rate that the world is evolving so quickly, if you're not learning yourself, you're getting left behind. By investing your time and your energy into knowledge, you're at least keeping up with inflation. And I think over the last 5 years, running my own business has allowed me to put a lot of time and energy into it. As Mike will highlight and testify, probably the last 4 years I've spent over 15 grand a year on my own personal education through the business, and that's allowed the business to develop and grow. It's allowed me to become a better individual, a better business owner, better at marketing, better at this, that and the other. And I think it's really important. I think in the industry there's a real strong place for more learning, more training, and not just in the industry but out of the industry as well. I kind of saw a group of people, I think James Humphrey Sohn we've had on the podcast with his business partner Jack. I think the Baldock brothers were there as well. An external event, all around marketing and that aspect of things. Great to see people out at these different areas, bringing new kind of weapons and new techniques back into the industry. And I'm a big believer of that myself.
Yeah, go outside to look for inspiration, because otherwise we just all become, very much the same. I probably don't look outside as much. I did listen to a lot of the high performance podcasts. I do still enjoy those, and you get some inspiration often from sport and stuff like that. But actually, in terms of marketing and ideas, if you do step outside the industry, then it's always going to be something that is slightly different. And what about the team? Do you have a team that also believe in that?
I think so. I think some people really embrace it more than others. I think me and Mike are a little bit different on that. Mike likes to get his head stuck into what he's doing. He does like to learn, but he will only learn the things that interest him. Which I get that, because then you're doing something that interests you. But sometimes I find, especially running a business, you have to learn the thing that you can't afford to buy someone to do. And even though it doesn't interest you, especially at the beginning in the early days, you just have to learn to do it. You have to learn how to set up a podcast. You have to learn how to edit in Premiere Pro. You have to learn how to do Meta Business Ads Manager and understand how to retarget an audience, because you can't afford to spend $1,000 a month for someone to do it for you. You have to do it yourself. So there's part of needing to do it. But from the team's point of view, I do think that kind of falls back, and I think people do see that. It depends who the line manager is, and then I think there's a lot of internal stuff that goes on. I mean, Andy, from a lettings point of view for us, is brilliant at constantly doing training sessions, not just with his team, but with the agents, with some of the other teams as well, so that people understand what it is to be a landlord, what it is to be a property manager. Cindy, our marketing director, she's really good at having consistent one-to-ones, consistent group meetings and catch-ups. And then I've always said to people as well, whether they remember it or they don't remember it, but if you want to go and learn something, Austin's sat here with us now, who's doing all the video setup for us. If he wants to learn something that's going to make him a better asset to the team, let me know. And if we think it makes sense, then we'll pay for it and go and do it. We've paid for a few different video courses and things like that along the way. So I think it's important that you do that as a business, because it sets a culture that we're trying to grow and be better as well.
That was the word I was going to say. It's all about growth there. You talked about the one-to-ones and what have you. When you are building a team, and the personal development side of it has always been really important to me. I think it's important that the wider team know that there is that aim to grow and that aim to get better. It's what drives a business forward. And I think it doesn't have to be, like I said, we did our learnings that they don't have to be work related. It doesn't have to be there, but actually knowing that people are willing to invest in themselves, and it's time investment. It doesn't have to be money. You mentioned that if you're happy to do that, are you willing to invest the time in yourself to get yourself to be better, a better human, a better estate agent, a better videographer, whatever that might be? Actually taking the time to invest in yourself, you'll get better results. And ultimately, I always say within our business, I want us all to grow, and then the business grows. And I think that's so important.
And you mentioned about doing this podcast. We're fortunate that we get to ask questions to guests, but then sometimes it's me and you, and we're not necessarily asking questions to guests. We're asking questions to each other, or we're sharing things that we've already learned. And I think it's Jim Quick that says it, but if you teach something, you've learned it twice.
Yes.
And I do find that by sharing your experience, your knowledge, it re-cements it back in, and you actually use it more by doing that. And that's one of the things that I love about teaching, helping, training, is it's also better for me, because it's kind of re-ingrains it back in my mind as well, which is quite cool.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Jim Quick that I read it, but it said if you want to learn something really commit to teaching it. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. And I thought about maybe that's one of the reasons why we do this. But yeah, it's very true. And it's probably never been easier either to take the time to learn and educate yourself, particularly, you know, in our industry. It doesn't have to cost anything. You can just go online and do it. But there is so many videos out there. And if you were starting an estate agency today, where would be your first port of call, do you think?
World Class Real Estate Podcasts.
Yeah.
Probably start there.
There's a few in the back office as well, isn't there? There's a few that you can go back and listen to, I reckon.
Absolutely. I think if you're, let's say you're in a rut, because it's probably more likely that people listening, they could find themselves in a bit of a rut. Either a little bit demotivated, or maybe the business or the figures are not quite 100% where they want them to be. Sometimes you need that little spark just to kick you back into gear. And I think, from an industry point of view, there's some great personal brands out there that you can read the LinkedIn posts and you can watch the YouTube videos. But I think when you're stuck in that rut, you just got to ask yourself a couple of questions is around the goal. It's normally the fact of what is that goal? What's that business thing that I want to achieve? And then when you know what that is, and it's going to be different for everyone, but who is someone that you can get a little bit of advice for around that? And that advice might come from YouTube or a podcast or this, that, and the other. If it's AI, you might go down the life cycle wormhole of listening to Mark talk about it, or, Ian Preston talks a lot about AI. So if you want to know more about that, we've had Michelle on the sofa recently, and since we did this face-to-face, she was talking about how she uses chat, and we've spoken about that as well. If it's valuation conversion, you might want to just DM a couple of real shit hot valuers and just ask the question, I'm really struggling with this. But I think that's something that I always find will really help, is work out for yourself what is the goal that you want to really, really believe in, and then just have a look around the industry and see who's a specialist in that. Read some of their stuff, follow some of their socials. Don't be scared to drop them a DM, ask the question, pick up the phone, and then just connect the dots. And I think that's probably what I would do, which I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but there is, on social media now, it's so much easier to connect with someone. And it's a estate agency. We're not saying go and try and DM David Beckham because you want to take a better free kick. They're going to answer, they're going to respond. And if they don't, they're a dickhead. Leave them alone and go on to the next one.
And there's enough out there, and there's enough people now willing to help. I think we have a perception, or I certainly did 10 years ago, about our industry of being uber competitive because we were very localized. Now social media has made that doesn't have to be the case. We can look at someone like Michelle from out of our area and follow them and see what they do really well. And like you say, connect really, really easily, and then start to build some good habits around it as well. Because if you are wanting to get better and you are wanting to improve and go down a bit more of an education route, it's not just a one-off course that is going to, you might have things that you take away from that course, but actually building, habits that you can do every week, or videos that you can watch, a couple of times a month, whatever it might be. Choose something that you can actually get into your routine, because it's not just one personal development thing that we're talking about, having the potential to improve. Growth happens day by day, week by week. I think that's really important to point out.
Yeah. And I think outside, you were talking about a book that you're reading at the moment, or it might be an audio book or an actual book, but you're now ingraining certain things into your day because of that. Tim Ferriss's book, and I've listened to the 4-Hour Work Week, by Tim Ferriss, and then that's all around efficiency and how to be, on top of the business rather than in the thick of doing things. So that's things that I've taken from that particular book, same author, different book, and then implemented those in how I work as well. So getting outside of the industry is great. I think Anton, from the Mastermind, he mentioned a book called How to Own the World, which he said, really, really changed the way he thought about money, and told us all to listen to that. And I downloaded and listened to that, and I always listen to it on the way up and down from Leicester, funnily enough. And I just found that really opened up my mind to how wealth works and how money across the world works. So those little things are great as well. Get a recommendation from someone, go on social media, ask it, what's the best audio book that you've ever listened to? Give me your top 3, and just have a little scan through it. And these days with chat, you can feed them all in, get the summary of them, find out which one you actually want to listen to, and you're rocking and rolling. Yeah.
I think that's a really, really, really good point. And again, it's not just industry focused; it's outside inspiration. And we say all the time, and I won't do it now because we're wrapping up. But we say we love our industry. We want to see it improve and get better. That doesn't just happen by just being insular. Actually, you've got to go out. You've got to look. And I think the other thing about this education, personal development, you've got to be intentional about it. You've got to want to do it, and you've got to, therefore make. You talked about. My question was, where would you go? Well, actually, your question was, well, first, sit down almost with a piece of paper and make a plan. And that's about creating the intention to go out and do it. And I think that's a really important thing to take away. And hopefully this has been useful. If you have enjoyed today's episode, please share it out on social media. Thank you very much to Iceberg Digital for sponsoring, and we will see you again next week.